Mr. Oleg, today we are going to talk about an economic and political topic, which I would call it. But in the end, the elections in the United States of America, the new president, the new old one, as it is sometimes called, still raise certain doubts, forecasts, analytics, and this affects Ukraine, Europe, and the United States of America. In short, the whole world. During his election campaign, U.S. President Donald Trump stated that he wanted to reduce funding for the European part. If there are threats to Europe, then Europe must pay for its defense in the first place. In your opinion, if Trump does cut funding for NATO's eastern flank, will Europe have the means to pay for its security and ultimately continue to support Ukraine? I will probably answer you with the words of Shmyhal, who in my opinion is a great man. Said yesterday that Ukraine's financing prospects for 2025 are 100% closed. In the last week before the U.S. election, in anticipation of negative results for the Democrats, the G7 and European countries agreed to a $50 billion loan to Ukraine for 2025. Of the $50 billion, $35 billion is the European part, and $20 billion is the American part. Loan repaid from Russian assets. A loan that fully covers Ukraine's financing needs for 2025. Therefore, Shmyhal quite reasonably stated that everything is clear for Ukraine in 2025. Why did I remind you of this now in response to your question? The 25th year for Europe is seen without any fundamental changes in terms of policy towards Ukraine, as far as security issues are concerned. Because as long as Ukraine is at war, Europe can feel more or less at ease, already in 2025, in terms of concrete actions from the dancing Trump. We will see exactly what actions he is going to take on the security part. Why? Because as for the economic part, it is already clear. On the very first day of his arrival in the Oval Office, Trump will start a very tough economic trade war with China, his promise of a 60% tax on everything, duties on all goods from China is a cross on the Chinese economy, we understand, and on you. And if a 20% duty on European goods is imposed, and Germany is already actively pushing the idea of a 10% duty on high-tech European goods, which is theoretically accepted by European business, then this is death for the entire volume of this. What the Chinese are doing to Europe and America. And China has an annual trade turnover of $800 billion with the Americans. China has yet to fully resolve trade issues with the EU, especially regarding electric vehicle duties. I give you a guarantee that if the Americans introduce 60% of the duties on Chinese goods, Europe will do the same thing very quickly. For China, this is an extremely hard blow. Although China has already resorted to direct subsidization of the Chinese economy in order to salvage the likely negative consequences of those trade wars, but it will definitely not solve the issue of a possible market for Chinese goods. Why is it so important? The fall of the Chinese economy will actually mean a sharp decline in demand for Russian energy, a sharp decline in Sino-Russian trade, which will undoubtedly hit the Russian budget revenues hard. Because we understand that 80% of Russia's oil turnover goes to India and China is the main player there. These factors are connected, and with Russia's economy stagnating, Trump's actions will be a significant signal. That Putin will be forced to sit down at the negotiating table and seek some kind of compromise. When Trump said that he would resolve the war very quickly, the first argument and the first explanation of how he was going to do it was to manipulate energy prices, primarily oil prices. He said, "I'd bring oil down to $40 per barrel." This is not very close to the truth. So the American economy is actually looking forward to Trump quite seriously. And when we look at the dynamics of the indices in the U.S. stock market, they greeted Trump's arrival with great vigor. Other U.S. indices went up. So let's see. You see, in reality, the question of war is a question of resources. The question of war is a question of money. We are now talking about the global economy. We are talking about whether the European Union will be able to help Ukraine, how it will work. We keep forgetting that Ukraine must first of all rely on its own resources. And on their own capabilities. And so far at the moment, our authorities are, again, in such a light euphoria. Why? If Trump comes in and we're given $50 billion with a 2025 shutdown, there's no need to overstrain, seek new sources, or worry about economic booking. Everything will be fine. The money will come. We will survive 2025, and at the end of 2025, perhaps the war will end, as the International Monetary Fund wrote in its forecast, but who knows? Therefore, there is no point in actively creating additional problems for ourselves in search of unpopular solutions. That is, this paradigm, this ideology, which I'm talking about now, in my opinion, is false. Why false? Because it is based on the principle. We got through the day, and thank God. It doesn't work in the economy. It doesn't work in countries that do medium-term planning, at least. In our country, it's exactly like that. We've been given money, and thank God, and we can do nothing. The president did not sign the law on raising taxes. Why? There will be money for the next year, so he doesn't have to sign it. The question is, you can also give away a little money, because if they give 50 billion, there will definitely be some 20 billion hryvnias to give to people. Moreover, it's definitely a positive thing, and you can promote it quite actively. And why not? So this is what we have in Ukraine now. I mean, probably in the current situation with economic models, by the way, you have noticed how the booking statements have changed, right? There will be no economical booking, but an additional criterion will be added to the existing model. Why do this when there is already money? In other words, the economy does not need to work more actively. It is enough for it to work as it is. I mean, people have gotten used to it, and no one there criticizes the government too much, right? And if something changes, there will be critics. Why? Let's live the way we are living. If they still gave us money, I would say, a conciliatory position, a passive position, I would say. But it's not good. I mean, it's definitely not going to be useful because we are not all going to die collectively in 2025, but we will have 2026. So, Mr. Oleg, I agree with you. I always say 150%, this time probably 170%. Before returning to American politics, I want to continue discussing this important topic. In your opinion, aside from tax hikes and economic reservation, What other factors could strengthen Ukraine's economy from within without relying on external aid or loans?
Відверто дуже і дуже мало підвищення податків, можливість економічного бронювання тощо. Які ще фактори, на вашу думку, могли б допомогти підсилити українську економіку, от саме не за допомогою вливань?
Are there any other mechanisms that have not yet been fully utilized?
Чи є ще, чи залишились такі механізми, які поки що не задіяні наповну?
The fact that the Ukrainian economy was not put on a war footing is not even worth discussing. We live in a peacetime paradigm, so there is no need to talk much about it. Let's go through the Ukrainian cities, the big ones, at least those that are not in the direct shelling zone. I'm not talking about Kharkiv, because it's a nightmare there, just like Dnipro and Odessa.
Дуже сильно відчувається, особливо в центрі міста, особливо по вечорах, дух війни. Та боронь Боже.
What else needs to be done? We are constantly talking about the existence of a huge shadow economy in the country.
Ми говоримо про наявність величезної тіньової економіки в країні.
And the government's actions probably made it happen. They drove business deeper and deeper into the shadows. Shmyhal's statements that 98% of those who received summonses by mail issued through Reserve Plus are people without stable income and without a permanent place of employment, well, I don't want to call it an outright lie, but in my opinion, this situation is very far from the truth.
Я не хочу називати відвертою брехнею, але, на мій погляд, ця ситуація дуже далека від правдивої.
According to my immediate circle of people who work, pay taxes, including individual entrepreneurs, the people who received the letters are theoretically too many of the 2%, to be honest, of all the people I know. Therefore, as one of the ways to combat the shadow economy, economic booking does not work in Ukraine and will not work.
Як один зі способів боротьби з тіньовою економікою, економічне бронювання у нас не працює, працювати не буде.
I repeat, because they gave us money, the easiest to mobilize today are those in legal business, which has been given unpredictable powers to ensure the mobilization process. Employers are required to inform the military commissariat about those liable for military service. That is, at the moment, business has been given powers that it should not have to bear. It should work legally and pay taxes, ensure growth and results of its activities, everything. It does not have to ensure mobilization. This is one point. The second is that we are now periodically hearing certain statements from representatives of the Verkhovna Rada about very interesting methods of accumulating funds for the budget. For example, we recently heard a statement about the need to force the sale of war bonds to the population. When I heard this, I had a moment of humor. That is, a pensioner receives UAH 300 of her pension, of which UAH 100 must be spent on a bond, and she honestly survives for a month on UAH 2000. Is this a mechanism? Or in relation to whom is this meant? Those who already pay taxes. So we don't seem to be signing the military tax now, but we will take war bonds from people for 1,000 hryvnias. No, really, we are conscious people. We know what we're talking about. As a way to increase budget revenues, again, all of this is clearly aimed at those who already work legally and pay taxes legally. We did not see any innovations that would somehow catch the eye and at least give some logic for bringing 45% of Ukraine's shadow economy out of the shadows. These are definitely not Shmyhal's fight or work statements.
Про повістки, там 98%, про які він говорив, на тих, хто не працює, це брехня 100%.
This statement was not expanded on. The 98% he mentioned for those not working is true, but it wasn't part of the criteria. It was just the Reserve Plus distributed via letters to those liable for military service. The Ministry of Defense, which has no connection to the tax office, did this. Does the tax office send out letters?
Тим більше цим займалося Міністерство оборони, яке не має конекту і не збирає дані з податкової. Слухайте, що, податкова ті...
It was the Ministry of Defense and TCC that sent them out. What taxpayer base does the Ministry of Defense have? Are we really that naive? Why are we talking about this? So in my opinion, as long as the government has external funding, it will not do anything unpopular. And the phrase that economic reservation is not supported by the military is certainly true. But how can it be supported? There will always be certain segments of the population, certain social groups that will be dissatisfied with certain decisions, and that's normal. How else are you going to make decisions in a society that consists of different views, social groups, and pluralism of opinions? Well, there will always be dissatisfied people. But how else? So I say again, do not expect any changes now and in the near future, in 2025. But maybe something will change. When Trump changes something, when Trump starts to put pressure, some problems will begin to arise. What is the question? The issue is that even if you have money, you can't buy a weapon. In order to buy a weapon, even if you have money, you need the permission of the country that produces the weapon. And we have already made it absolutely clear. There are no weapons in Europe. The European Union's arms factories are operating at full capacity. Well, the fact that European countries spent less than 1% of their GDP on security and defense is now coming out sideways. Because the military enterprises that provided weapons to European countries were counting on the armed forces of European countries to be around 100 to 150,000 people and a few dozen tanks. This is not the volume that is needed in a full-scale war, where such a volume is destroyed in a week. The United States of America has the weapons today. They have always spent a lot of money. They have always played the role of the world's policeman. But again, arms sales are a very politically motivated thing. You can have money, but you will not buy weapons unless you have the consent of the manufacturer. And if there is a lack of political will on Trump's part, even if we have the money, we will not be able to fully implement the $50 billion we are talking about. I'm not talking about using these weapons for long-range strikes or some other things that are essential to ensure balance at the front. Unfortunately, there is an expectation that Trump will start looking for compromises with Putin. And unfortunately, this is true. And those compromises will most likely harm Ukraine, for sure. Until after January 20th, I'm sure nothing will change in Ukraine. Not the exchange rate, economic booking, or search for additional sources. We'll pass the 2025 budget in November, claiming we have 1.6 trillion hryvnias, though it won't be enough for social payments. We are postponing all the rest for next year to see how the new U.S. administration will behave. Moreover, we understand that Trump is just the tip of the iceberg. There's also defense, a bunch of people who have made a lot of different statements about Ukraine that are extremely negative. And all of this will shape the ideology of the president himself, because he makes decisions in consultation with his advisors on international security, domestic and financial issues. So, Probably by February, we will have a timeout that will take place in Ukraine in a completely calm manner. There will be a magical distribution of 1,000 hryvnias, Ukrainian cashback, and people will talk about how we overcame the domestic shadow economy by issuing summonses to non-workers. And we will all believe and keep quiet. They will give us money, everything will be calm, and in February we will see what happens next. That is my forecast for the next few months.
А в лютому місяці почнеться дивина, і подивимося, як воно буде далі. Тобто такий мій прогноз на найближчі декілька місяців.
Mr. Oleh, I agree with you again, but you know, this time I will allow myself to say something. I hope that these predictions will not come true, and that we will somehow manage to turn around the situation we have now, at least through talk and publicity. But still, according to you, it remains an alarming situation for our country, for Ukrainians. First of all, especially given the internal and external factors. But thank you for this conversation. Thank you for, yes, a little argument from your side, of course. Yes, you remember the reaction of one of our ministers responsible for information policy to the European Union's proposal to replace the information marathon with a pluralism of opinions in the information space. It was said clearly, no, we will have a marathon until the end of the war. This is about the desire to listen to public opinion and seek compromises on different opinions in society. Unfortunately, I think I would also really like my predictions to not come true. Mr. Oleh, when you mentioned war bonds, you referred to a moment of humor. I think the whole of Ukrainian society is experiencing a similar moment, laughing and believing in the best, like Lesya Ukrainka, instead of crying. Thank you for your analysis. Oleh Pendzyn, Executive Director of the Economic Discussion Club. We were really laughing to keep from crying. But you see, there is little funny in the situation we have now, more than 2.5 years after the start of the full-scale invasion.